Thank you, Chris. So, Vivian, if you'll go ahead and introduce our next panel.
Yes, hello, good morning. My name is Vivian Canizares, and I'll be introducing you to our other two prestigious keynote speakers, I'm sorry. So we do have, in this second session, we have the National Transportation Outlook from the maritime and railroad perspective. Our first speaker is Mr. Wade Morefield. He's a transportation industry analyst. He works in the U.S. Department of Transportation Maritime Administration, or MARAD. He is pretty much has an ample experience, 25 years of experience and 10 years in MARAD. He has worked on the Marine Highway Program, the Tiger Built Infra, and he used to be previously the planning director of Port Canaveral, Florida, where he works to coordinating, the capital improvement with different agencies. He has a bachelor's degree on public administration and a master in science of urban and regional planning from the University of Florida State. He's an Army veteran, and he has served in Germany. Thank you so much. And without further ado, please welcome to Wade.
So Wade, if you will go ahead and share your screen now.
I will. Thank you. Thank you, Vivian. Appreciate that introduction. And I dialed in a little early, and I want to say thanks to Chris and Kevin for that interesting discussion. I hope what we're doing at MARAD helps with the leveraging of investments for transportation. I'm sharing my screen. You see my presentation? I think not.
We've got your screen, but we need to see your full screen presentation.
Okay, stand by. I think I have to grab it again. And I know we're running a little behind on time, but I will catch you up. And I think, let's see if this one takes it. Share. You seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes, now just go to slideshow.
Full slides, there we go. There we go.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you. All right, again, thank you everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I think some of you, I looked at the participant list, I think some of you have probably heard this presentation. This is basically the same presentation we gave at TRB, but I do want to say that the response to the presentation we gave at TRB, this presentation was very positive. And so I'm hoping you'll find the information useful. And at the end of the presentation, to jump ahead a second, I hope you'll reach out to me, the state DOTs in particular, so that we can provide feedback on your state freight plans and as you develop your next state freight plan. So I apologize, first of all, that I'm not really going to talk about any waterway statistics. I know the theme here was to talk about the health of waterways, but what I can speak to with some authority is the work that MARAD is doing to facilitate investments in ports and waterway infrastructure around the country. And I also want to particularly share our feedback on state freight plans, our review process for state freight plans, and share some of the best practices that we've identified around the country for those state freight plans as everybody, as I said, advances into their major updates of the state freight plans. So I hope it's relevant. And anyway, with that, we'll get started on the presentation. So I'm going to move very quickly. The presentation will be made available after I'm done. So please, if I move too quickly, I probably won't even get through the whole thing, but we'll send the presentation out. And if you have questions or you want to discuss it more, please reach out to me with the email at the end. So here's the map. This map is only updated through 2018. We've done a number, probably another 30 or 40 infrastructure projects since 2018. But the big number is since 2009, MARAD has directly managed $2.3 billion in direct federal investments for ports and waterways around the country. And I think the number before 2009 was basically zero. So we've come a long way, particularly with our port infrastructure development program that was just recently authorized. But also we have the old Tiger, which is now the BUILD program, the Infra program, the Marine Highway program. And I think thanks go out to a lot of the stakeholders that are probably participating on this call and other state DOTs and other people that are reaching out to Congress. And I think Congress is proving to be very receptive to infrastructure investments as economic development, particularly for ports and waterways. So thank you for that. This is just a slide that shows the different list of the different types of funding and financing assistance that DOT offers for ports and waterways development. I'm not going to go over these. I think everybody's probably somewhat familiar with them. If you're not, please use the slide when you get it. And the programs are very easy to Google and find out more information. And we are always here, happy to help put you in touch with the right people and facilitate any kind of meetings to advance your interests. Another big item we have is the Port Planning Investment Toolkit. This is a partnership with the American Association of Port Authorities. I don't have a list of all of the modules here. We have an ITS module that is new to the Port Planning Investment Toolkit. We have a Marine Highway module. We have a planning module, a financing module, and several different modules of this. But the overall the overall purpose of the Port Planning Investment Toolkit is to help ports obtain funding that may not be federal funding, but it's to help you in the planning process, help ports in the planning process to create funding, viable funding plans. And this toolkit is available for download. We encourage everybody to download it. State DOTs will probably find information in this very useful for their outreach efforts with ports as well. So state freight plans, let's talk about state freight plans and what MARAD is doing on state freight plans. I'm not going to go through this. Basically, the bottom line of this, state freight plans were authorized by the FAST Act in 2015. All 50 states and Puerto Rico have done state freight plans. And there's a new national highway freight program specifically related to those. It's a separate funding stream under Title 23 for funding freight improvements, and up to 10% of each state's national highway freight program apportionment can be used for freight intermodal or freight rail projects, and that includes port projects. So there is money available specifically for port projects through the Title 23 money that comes to your states under the National Highway Freight Program, and we want to help you take advantage of that. Required state freight elements. This is right out of the statute. 10 items that are required in state freight plans. I'm not going to go over these, but the bottom line is that when we reviewed all state freight plans, Federal Highway Administration provides them to MARAD and Federal Railroad Administration for review and concurrence. But broadly, each goal of the National Multimodal Freight Policy and each element of the National Freight Strategic Plan was discussed by every state freight plan. But we found there was no common structure among the plans. Very few states utilized maritime performance measures, and most projects listing did not include enough geographic data to determine if projects had maritime nexus. So that's kind of the information that we would like to get at in upcoming updates of state freight plans, particularly the last one about geographic data. There's usually an appendix or an addendum to a state freight plan that includes the investment plan, but sometimes those investment plans, many times those investment plans don't have enough geographic descriptive data to let us know if that's a maritime relevant project, i.e. ports or waterways. So when MARAD reviews, we also have some optional questions that we look at when we review state freight plans. These include multimodal connections, intermodal infrastructure, marine highways, maritime markets, ports and waterways, infrastructure, connectors inside the gate, outside the gate, et cetera, et cetera. These are not required under Title 23 under the FAST Act, but these are the optional plans that MARAD looks at when we want to evaluate how well a state is, meeting their goals as far as maritime goes and providing information. So the summary of all 50 state freight plans is right here. Basically, this is just a ranking high, medium, low as to how we felt projects or the different elements that we look at were addressed by state freight plans. And so you can take a look at this and see how your state freight plan did. Here's the ratings. So stakeholder outreach was the highest. Everybody seems to do a very good job of stakeholder outreach with their ports. Generally, we found that ports and waterways interests were represented on freight advisory committees. Unfortunately, down near the bottom, we see domestic maritime shipping and America's Marine Highway Program. We would like to get those numbers up. Of course, all states don't have, that's not relevant for all states, but nonetheless, a lot of states that do have marine highway, even marine highway projects and marine highway routes did not address those in their state freight plans, and we would like to see that change. Here's a ranking, kind of just a cumulative ranking of all the states. New Jersey came out on top. Wyoming came down on the bottom. Again, a little caveat there about, the relevance of ports and waterways and maritime to a state. But overall, this is just a kind of a quick and dirty internal use only. So we're sharing this with you, but this is something we used internally just to kind of see where to try to focus our efforts. Again, here it is in a graphical depiction showing the states. As you can see, there were a couple of outliers. I think I'll address those because I don't want to make it seem like Ohio doesn't have a very good, or Michigan a very robust waterways program. They do. It's just the issue was that those programs were not reflected in their state freight plans. So as we talk about state freight plans and best practices, we want to be sure to capture what you know your business at a state. We don't know your business at a state. That's why I'm not giving waterway statistics for states today, but we want to hear your story. We want to hear each state's story about what their opportunities are, what their obstacles are, where they want to be, where they are with regard to ports and waterways and maritime. And then, so please give us that story in your state freight plan and reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help. This is a listing of states that are using the National Highway Freight Program, that 10% apportionment of their FAST Act funds for freight for ports and waterways projects. So it's pretty good. We'd like to see that increase, but there are other states that have different funding streams for their ports, notably like Virginia, which has a lot of state support for their ports. So that's included. So here are some of the best practices. I'm going to just touch on one. Let's see, it's 10:33. I'm going to just flip through these basically. So multimodal connections. I'm going to highlight one of the best practices. Aerial photographs of ports. So this is from Idaho. Aerial photographs are always very important, or very detailed maps that show what the infrastructure is that the states are talking about in their state freight plans, particularly where there are needs. And if you could illustrate those needs in a very kind of a photograph or a graphical format, very, very helpful to help us document those. Intermodal facilities, Nevada was the best at intermodal capabilities and commodities. And now Nevada, not a waterway state, but they did document their intermodal facilities, their intermodal transfer facilities for the air and truck, and a lot of the cargo coming, of course, from the Southern California ports. So, just because you don't have ports and waterways doesn't mean a port can't do a good job, or a state can't do a good job of documenting intermodal facilities. And this is, again, very, very important to, include a geographic description. And then here, this one goes into more detail about the type of facility and that sort of thing. Domestic maritime shipping, graphs and maps of their maritime shipping partners. This was from the New Jersey State Freight Plan, showing where commodities that were being shipped domestically from New Jersey were going and coming from. That's very helpful information. I think this was freight analysis framework data. Top import-export commodities, Alaska and Georgia did a very good job on this. I just want to give kudos. I think Georgia may be on the call. Georgia did a very good job, but the best practice we have highlighted here is from Alaska, just basically showing tonnage and value of exports and imports. Marine highways, here we go. New Jersey actually graphically illustrates marine highways on their plan. And I'm just going to flip through here because I know we want to leave time for questions. Maritime commodities, I think this was South Carolina. This is great. It has it shows the commodities, top commodities in South, going across the ports in South Carolina, 2011 data, and forecast to 2040. So forecasts are very important. Most states did not do any kind of forecast of their maritime activity. Very useful in a state freight plan. Port profiles, I think this was California, did a very good job of describing port profiles in their state freight plan, detailed data about each port in the state, commodities, other port statistics, access, intermodal access and connectors, what the major issues are at that port, and then particular initiatives that are being undertaken by each port. So port profiles are very, very, we can pull a lot of really good data from these. Mapping locations. This was Kentucky, used U.S. Army Corps of Engineers data for maps for the inland waterway system. There's a lot of great information at the Corps of Engineers, and we encourage you to avail yourselves of that. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to touch on this, and then I'm probably going to just cut to the end. So the investment plans that go with state freight plans. It's very important, as I said, that we have geographic data that describes where these freight investments are proposed and whether they have relevance to ports and maritime. so one of the best practices here, this is from Maryland, in the investment plan for the state freight plan for Maryland, they actually included a port kind of a segment that describes all projects that are relevant to ports. It describes the status of the type of project, who owns the project, whether or not there's federal funding, because we would like to see your state funded projects as well in your state freight plans in your investment element. That's fine. It just gives us a better picture of where the state is with regard to investments. So yeah, we would encourage, I think, as a bottom line of the best practices here for state freight plans, we would encourage states to provide a very good depiction geographically of where their investments are and how they relate to ports and maritime, if in fact they do. So so to hear port improvement needs, there's another way of doing that. Washington did a marine ports and navigation plan. It was included as Appendix B in their state freight plan. I don't mean to call out Florida, but I think we looked at Florida's updated state freight plan recently, and there is a Florida state seaport plan. I think FSTED puts that together. I'm not sure, but it was not actually included in the state freight plan. So we would like to see relevant documents regarding ports and waterways that are referenced in your state freight plan. We would like to see those included with your state freight plan. And I'm going to leave it with that. There are numerous other best management practices outlined in the presentation, but and it'll be made available to you. Please reach out to me. I'm kind of our primary point of contact. We are setting up meetings with individual states. We have other documents that came out of our review process, and we are happy to share that information with state DOTs as they develop updates to their state freight plan. Just observations, purely voluntary. There's no requirement for this kind of coordination, but we're happy to share our insights with the states as they develop their new state freight plans. So I'm sorry that was so fast. I have a lot of other information. We can share that with you one-on-one. So I think that's going to conclude my presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Wade. Jimmy, you had a question?
Sure. Wade, and I think you just answered it at the end there, but my question was if a state does a more detailed waterways or port plan as a separate planning mechanism than their freight plan, should they just append that, or do they need to have an entire section that's detailed directly within the freight plan? And does MARAD provide any recommendations, like your presentation, on exactly what you'd like to see in the freight plan from a maritime perspective?
Right. Yep. So so the statute, the FAST Act, the statute for state freight plans did not lay out a format for state freight plans. I think, the flexibility was wanted. They wanted to provide flexibility to states to develop these state freight plans, whatever way they thought would the states could best reflect their freight activities. So in hindsight, maybe that wasn't the best way to do that. I don't know. That's Federal Highway Administration's decision to make if they put out some sort of regulatory guidance or something on that. But all I can say is that there were several instances where we saw references, and we actually know of, other state planning documents that relate to ports and waterways that were not included, or maybe not even referenced in some of the state freight plans. So ideally, I think ideally, as MARAD offering, voluntary guidance, optional guidance to states and developing state freight plans, a maritime section of your state freight plan that includes excerpts of those other relevant state planning documents as they relate to ports and waterways as a preferred or as a best practice, but optionally, as like Washington State did, just include them as an addendum, or at least, reference them and give us a website or a link that we can click on them. So some states didn't do that either. So there's really when you look at a state freight plan, there's no indication that there's other activities going on in that state with regard to ports and waterways planning. And we would like to capture that. And that relates also back to freight advisory committees. I think that's kind of what we also want to see when state freight plans discuss the activities of their freight advisory committees. We would like to see some states just say we had a freight advisory committee. Other states went to great lengths to detail. I think it was California, great lengths to detail the activity, the membership of that freight advisory committee and the activities, the meetings and the outreach that that freight advisory committee did. I think that also is something that was missed in a lot of state freight plans that we would like to see captured in more of them. So I hope that answers your question, Jim.
Excellent. Thank you, Wade. That wonderful. Yes, you have brought us back into time, so I appreciate that. Vivian, if you'll go ahead and introduce Chuck.
Yes. Our second keynote speaker is Mr. Chuck Baker. He's the president of the American Shoreline and Regional Railroad Associations. He's celebrating his second year anniversary as a president, and he has worked as a partner and for 15 years in Chambers, Conlon, and Hartwell, where not only represented the Shoreline Association as a client, but also the National Railroad Construction and Maintenance Association, One Rail Coalition, the American Railway Development Association, Norfolk Southern, and Canadian National. Mr. Baker is a graduate from Rice University from Houston, Texas, and he lives in Capitol Hill in Washington with his wife, Sarah, and his two daughters, Nora and Lila. And he's a native of Baltimore. So without further ado, I welcome Chuck. Thanks for speaking with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for the introduction, Vivian. I'm going to speak for a few minutes, and then I do have a presentation that I'll share for a few minutes during the middle of the speech with a couple maps and stats, but I'm not going to leave that up the whole time because it doesn't apply to everything I'm saying. But I hope everyone's doing great today. It's lovely to be here. It is the day after the Super Bowl, which I think most people would agree should be a national holiday, but here we are all, working away. So we're heroes, no doubt, plugging away. Thanks also to ITTS for the invitation. It's an impressive group. I didn't know a whole lot about it before I got this invitation, but it's really well regarded when I've checked around, and I can see why, given the audience and the speaker lineup and the member states. It's great to see you all in the state DOTs working together, thinking long-term, thinking about planning, thinking about freight. You all obviously know freight is typically a much lower profile than passenger, but extraordinarily crucial. So it's great to see state DOTs working on it behind the scenes like this. And congrats to Frank and Jimmy and everyone else involved in, actually pulling off the logistics of this virtual conference. We did our own one of these for the Short Line Railroad Association back in October, and I can tell you it's tough. It's all of the work and then some of a regular conference, but a lot less of the fun, none of the drinks, none of the dinners, none of the hallway conversations, plus all the technical issues. So it's kind of a bad deal to run a conference like that, but they're important to do. And I think they're successful and, a lot better than just giving up because of the pandemic. So nice work on that. I'm looking forward to talking for a few minutes about the future and what freight railroads can do in your 10 member states and throughout the whole country. But I want to take just a quick minute to look back first. 2020, probably a huge understatement to say it was a historically strange year, but I want to just start by thanking everybody who's on this for what you do for the country. I can speak most directly to what railroads did, but I know the same is true for truckers and highway construction folks, and for sure for the state DOTs. You never stopped working. Maybe you did it from home, but you never stopped. For railroads, we're the definition of critical infrastructure. But that's the same as the infrastructure you all manage. We figured out how to work safely in a pandemic and adjust to dramatically shifting business patterns, but we never stopped, not even for one day, 1 hour, right at the heart of the pandemic. It's a 24/7, 365 type of business, and you can't pause to figure it out. You gotta keep going. And that's because what rail moves is critical for the American economy. We're moving manufactured goods, raw materials, corn, wheat, grains, soybeans, energy products, energy inputs like coal, LNG, frac sand, crude oil, and even plenty of stuff directly related to the virus too, like plastic resin for face masks and chemicals for hand sanitizers. So thank you again for all that you are doing. moving on, I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the rail networks in your states, the benefits of those networks for your states, what railroads are doing to keep improving, and then I'll finish up with a quick couple thoughts on how your states might consider working with railroads to support your economies. So your states, each of your 10 states that are members of this, are blessed with relatively robust freight rail networks. And this is the part where I'm going to share my screen real quick. So let me do that. All right, I think that's working. You can see my screen. Somebody will let me know if you can't. I'll assume you can.
We can see.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to quickly tick through your 10 states. I won't belabor all the stats on this because that would take way too long. But here's the list of short line railroads in Arkansas. And then here's a couple facts about Arkansas. There's 2,500 miles of track. There's the big 3 class 1 railroads and 23 short lines. I list some of the important commodities moved. I'm going to list for each state the number of carloads that originate in the state and terminate in the state. And then at the bottom, we sort of translate both what's terminating and originating and moving through. We translate that into how many trucks would have to be additionally on your roads if rail wasn't moving what we were moving. For Arkansas, it's 9.4 million trucks. And I won't belabor the stats on each state, but I'll tick through them real quick. There's Florida. FEC is obviously a huge short line railroad in Florida, but there's quite a few other smaller ones too. 2,700 miles of track and would be 4.3 million additional trucks in Florida. In Georgia, a ton of short line railroads, very robust rail network, 4,500 miles of track, 9.6 million additional trucks would have been needed. Kentucky, there's the network. RJ Corman and Paducah and Louisville are 2 kind of big high profile short lines in the state, both very active members of our association. 2,500 miles of track again, and almost 13 million trucks would have been needed. Louisiana, there's the network. 2,900 miles of track would have been 7.4 million additional trucks. There's all six of the 7 class 1s serve Louisiana, plus another dozen short lines. Obviously moving a ton of chemical products wouldn't surprise anyone in Louisiana. Mississippi, there's the Mississippi network, 2,500 miles of track. That seems to be a common number. We're about that. Would have been 6.4 million additional trucks in Mississippi. There's the Missouri network, 3,700 miles of track, would have been 22 million additional trucks in Missouri, which would have been no fun for anyone to deal with. There's the South Carolina network, 2,200 miles of track, would have been 3.6 million additional trucks needed in South Carolina. Texas, I believe, has the most rail miles of any state in the country. There are 10,000 miles of railroad track in Texas. Would have been 23 million additional trucks needed. Virginia, obviously NS and CSX are huge there. There's quite a bit of short line operations, true, including Buckingham Branch, which is one of our favorite kind of short line railroad stories. And then this is my contact info because I think you all get these slides, and I'm thrilled to put any of you want to reach out at any time. We're thrilled to talk more either at the association level on policy and regulatory issues, or individually with getting you all connected with any of your local short line railroads who you might not already know. So that's some of the network in the in your states. So you notice I included both the class 1 railroads and the short line railroads. The short lines are the ones I represent most directly, but we all work together, hopefully seamlessly. We all work together as a network to get stuff where it needs to go. I would say you all probably know this, but short lines are generally thought of as essentially sort of the first and last mile of the freight rail network. We tend to serve more rural and small town areas, tends to be lighter density lines. We tend to own them because the class 1s no longer wanted to own those lines, and us owning them and buying them was a solution as a as a substitute for them getting abandoned, which would have been a bad deal for everyone. They tend to be locally owned and operated. We like to have the vibe, and I hope you all would agree, of sort of your friendly local railroad. We pride ourselves on being very, very easy to work with. If you call the short line railroad, you will probably get the president or the owner or the general manager of the short line on the phone in a couple of rings. There's not a big bureaucracy. They're very eager to work with folks, but work with government, work with state DOT, work with customers. They have capacity. They want more stuff on their line, and they're willing to hustle and scrap and fight and work for 6 months to get, one additional move, one additional customer, one additional transload operation. Some of the commodities that short lines tend to move, food and farm products like wheat and soybeans, chemicals like chlorine, mineral type products like cement, metals, iron, steel, aluminum, glass, stone, waste and scrap, metallic ores like copper. The list goes on and on and on. It's essentially anything and everything, but particularly the heavy, bulky stuff that tends to move in bigger volumes tends to favor rail. And so that's what we do. That's the kind of stuff we keep off the highway network. As you'd imagine, many of those businesses, manufactured goods, natural resources, many of those businesses run on very, very tight margins, and they operate in really, really competitive markets, both domestic and globally. So typically the ability for companies in your states to have access to freight rail, which can generally provide the most affordable surface transportation option, is a pretty big competitive advantage for your companies, and thus for your states that are looking to compete for those companies. And then also the benefits of a robust freight rail network, both class ones and short lines, go beyond just the immediate business advantage to the shippers. And some of this is more on kind of a policy wide front, which I think would be of interest to you all in the state DOTs. But getting more freight on the railroad and off of the highway helps with reducing what I'm sure you would agree is essentially the insatiable demand for highway maintenance funding. Since heavy trucks do the lion's share of the damage to the roads, getting some of that heavy material off of the roads onto the rail can really help keep your budgets sane. Freight railroads also help reduce road congestion. That might not be a big thing right now. I know at least in DC right now, the roads are still quite empty, but theoretically the pandemic will end one day and we'll be back to worrying about congestion. Each fully loaded rail car takes 3 to 4 trucks off the roads. So I gave you some of the stats earlier. In Arkansas, 9.4 million trucks, Virginia 7.7, Texas 23 million. So huge numbers of trucks can come off the roads onto rail. Safety, rail provides a huge safety benefit. Freight rail is about 3 to 20 times safer than the competition on the roads, kind of depending on how you measure it, whether it's equipment damage or casualties or fatalities. But it's quite a bit safer, and it makes sense. You're moving this heavy product and you take it off of the public right away and onto a privately controlled, restricted access right away. We're not perfect on safety, but we are trying to get there. We are at the point where there are very, very few, like vanishingly few accidents that are totally within control of the railroads, where a train is hitting a train or a train is hitting our own work equipment. We're not at zero, but we're getting, frankly, pretty close. We do still have a pretty big challenge with trespassing accidents and grade crossing accidents. That is proving more stubborn, but we are working as hard as we can, and some of that is in conjunction with state DOTs. And then the last big benefit I'll talk about on freight rail is environmental benefits. We all know that the environmental conversation is going to get much more prominent over the next few years with the Biden administration, plus a democratically controlled House and Senate, and just this is the way the world is going. But rail is the environmentally sustainable choice for surface transportation right now. We can move 1 ton of freight 470 miles on 1 gallon of diesel fuel. So that's a ton of freight on a gallon of diesel. That's taking it from Louisville past Atlanta to Macon, Georgia, or taking it from Shreveport, Louisiana, all the way up through Arkansas, all the way to Springfield, Missouri, and a few miles north of there too. I certainly don't mean to pick a fight with our trucking friends and always be comparing rail to trucks on the highway. Trucks are the dominant mode of freight transportation. Roads go everywhere. Most of state DOTs are, primarily focused on their road networks, and that's all fine. And trucks are a huge partner of ours, but we do compete with them, and we do think that states and companies in those states benefit greatly from having, robust rail network and with multiple modes competing for traffic. So those are a bunch of big benefits to having and investing in rail, but we're not perfect. I want to briefly mention one area where we are focused on improving. We know we have a lot of work to do. We need to get much easier to work with. I don't necessarily mean with the government. I think, although that's probably true also, short lines, we try to be, friendly and easy to work with. Class ones are, they're bigger businesses, maybe a little more of a challenge sometimes, but they, I think, try also. But I mean, we need to get easier for our customers to use us. We need to keep up with the digital revolution. Amazon was just mentioned earlier this morning. In a world with Amazon and Domino's and UPS and FedEx, customers expect real-time information about where their stuff is, right? Like if I order a $7 medium pepperoni pizza from Domino's, I know the name of the guy putting the toppings on, when it leaves the store, and I can track the car on the way to my house. So if you can do that for your pizza, you should also be able to do that for your rail car with $700,000 worth of lumber in it. So people want to know when their stuff's going to arise, when the empties are coming, what's the progress against the trip plan, all of that. And they don't necessarily want to talk on the phone to multiple companies to have to get it, or use a third-party broker, right? They want easy access, digital access. So we're committed to working on that. Our Class 1 partners are committed to working on that. We're getting better, but we still have some room for improvement there. And then I'm going to briefly finish with some thoughts on how your states might want to consider investing in, further investing in and supporting your rail networks. I will say, I'll let the Class 1 speak for themselves, but largely the Class 1s would tell you they do their own investment. They want productive partnerships with the states and the feds, but they're generally not looking for a lot of public money. The short lines are a little different. Like I talked about, we own lower density lines that still have huge capital needs. We are very eager to be in public-private partnerships with state DOTs, very welcoming of that. Some of your states on this call have very robust multimodal investment grant programs already. Virginia stands out, Georgia stands out, and I don't mean to leave others out. I think there's some others who probably make big investments too. Virginia and Georgia stand out to me. Pennsylvania and New York have big programs. I know they're not on this call. But Oregon has a big program. California has a big program. Those programs throughout the country have been used to great effect. They tend to have, they tend to be like $10 or $20 million a year type programs, not huge dollar, but they, give out a bunch of grants, maybe $1 million here, $2 million there. And they'll be to a short line who's working on a, rehabbing a 5-mile line into a big customer, upgrading the track, and this will help take, 30,000 trucks off the road, that kind of thing. Very targeted, specific projects that you can really point to as a success, and those programs tend to be thought of as a pretty good bang for the buck. They can be, frankly, a pretty efficient alternative to highway investment sometimes. And then the other nice part is they can be leveraged to compete successfully for federal funds too. There's some of the programs that Wade just mentioned, like Build and Infra. There's also a big rail program specifically called CRISI. If you can put some state money matched up with some private money and then go after the federal money, you can really start to leverage, some limited dollars. And then the last thing I'll talk about is some state tax credit programs. There's a big national tax credit aimed at helping short-line railroads rehabilitate their infrastructure. It's called the 45G tax credit. That's where it is in Title 26, the tax code. But there are also now quite a few states that are considering similar programs. Georgia and Kentucky, I think, both have those state tax credits already in place. Oklahoma has one, Alabama has one, Oregon has one. It helps preserve this rural rail service I'm talking about. Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Minnesota are all considering adding them this year. So it seems to be a trend that's accelerating. It's, you know, it's more Congress. I know that a state, or it's state legislatures, I should say. I know that a state DOT can't institute a tax credit program by itself, but to the extent you all are involved in policy discussions at the state level, I'd encourage you to think about that. It tends to be an extraordinarily efficient way to help your short lines. So I'm going to wrap it up with that. Again, thank you all for the invite. I think we are probably bumping up against time, but I'm happy to do a couple minutes of questions if there is still time.